Hello and welcome everybody to the third episode of the Cook and Liberty. As you can see in the title, we are gonna cook and gonna talk about liberty-oriented topics. Today I'm joined by Scott Nelson from the Austrian Economic Center and the Hayek Institute. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Simon.
So, Scott is, I'm gonna call him an expert on Cicero and the Antics. He wrote a book last year called Cicero, the 21st Politics in the 21st Century. So we are gonna start with Cicero, with the Antics, and we're gonna continue wherever the road takes us. How do you like that?
All right, sounds good to me.
Well, the thing is, before starting with the talking part, I'm gonna because we have the cook part as well. Let me tell you what we're gonna cook. So getting the food politics out of the picture from the get-go, I'm gonna do chili con carne, but I'm not gonna do a Mexican style. I don't know whether it's even this European style. It's gonna be definitely my style. So it is what it is. I have a beef minced meat. Of course, I have. Prepare some onion, garlic, and do not be shy with the garlic. Garlic is very, very, very good. I have some bell peppers and of course the chilies. I already have 2 chilies here, but we'll check because you can always add chili, but you can not take out chili. Afterwards I wanted to do a very famous Macedonian salad. We call it shopska. However, I did not get the proper cheese, so it's gonna turn into a Greek type of salad with chunks instead of grated white cheese. So that's the only big, let's say, change to the original idea. And besides that, we're gonna end with a lazy cake, let's say. And lazy because it's very easy to do when your children during the weekend want something sweet and you wanna watch some Netflix and stuff. Just do the lazy cake. It will do the job. Not the perfect thing, but it does the job. So without further ado, let's start with the first question of what I'm really interested in is why Cicero? Why Cicero is so important to you personally and should be important to, let's say, everybody?
Yeah, all right. I gotta say, before getting started talking about Cicero, the entire time that you were giving your little spiel there, I had going through my head, what would Gordon Ramsay say? I could see him just watching and being like, oh my God, what the hell is he doing there? And just totally taking you to the cleaners on this. But anyhow, eat your heart out, Gordon Ramsay. Let's talk about Cicero a little bit. My co-author Matthew Edwards and I late last year, just published a book called Cicero, Politics and the 21st Century. And we came to this book basically because, well, for a number of reasons. One is several years ago, he asked me, so Scott, would you like to write an article or something together? We figured, yeah, that'd be great. Let's do an academic article. And so we tried submitting, I think, to a couple different journals, an article we wrote on Cicero and the natural law. It was rejected. And then, so what do? The next logical thing for us was, well, instead of writing an article, why don't we just do a whole book? Because, in the process of researching for this article, I started seeing that actually there's a lot of dimensions to Cicero that we could talk about, and that would qualify it for a short book. And
sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
What's short book in your language?
Okay, so actually this book is genuinely short. It's 150 pages.
Okay, I'll accept that.
You can read. It's meant to be read, comfortably. It's not a book for scholars or anything like that. It's meant for just the general educated public that remembers maybe hearing about Cicero in high school or university. You vaguely know he was a Roman orator or something, and you want to know more about Cicero and how he might relate to the politics of our time. So yeah, that's basically what the book is about there. But one of the other reasons though that we came to this topic, or at least why I came to this topic, is because of the way that I concluded my last book, which was on Raymond Aron, and he was a French intellectual of the 20th century, and looking at the German influence on his political thought. And in that book, which is basically just my PhD dissertation turned into a book, I conclude by talking about our own and that ancient political virtue known as prudence. And I started wondering, what exactly does prudence look like in practice? Because I recall there's a bit, I think, in Aristotle's Ethics where he talks about the virtue of prudence. And he basically, what it comes down to is doing the right thing at the right time in regards to the right people, to the right extent. And you kind of wonder, okay, well, what exactly does that actually mean, you know? And it may not be a very prudent thing to ask for a more exact definition of prudence than that. But I figured the best way to figure out or explore this topic a bit more would be to look at prudence in action. And to do that, you have to look at an actual individual who lived through, you know, who was active politically, but was also a thinker. And so Cicero is, I think, one of the preeminent examples of a philosopher-statesman. And so that's one of the reasons why we chose Cicero. We could have chosen someone like, let's say, Abraham Lincoln, who was also, been written about as a philosopher-statesman. But we wanted to pick someone old, you know, in the ancient world. And Cicero has that to him in a way that Plato or Aristotle do not. And also just, we hear a lot about the Greeks, but I think we could afford to hear a little bit more about the Romans. So that's another reason for Cicero.
Would you say he would have been one of the best philosopher kings? Usually it's Marcus Aurelius mentioned as the philosopher king, but would Cicero be, let's say, close by or even better on your scale with the philosopher king?
I mean, I don't know about let's say, a philosopher king per se. I mean, I guess the problem that I have with that is the use of the term king. I mean, Cicero was firmly devoted to the Republic, you know, of course, so there's no room for kings. I mean, for him, the ideal thing would have been he does the cursus honorum, so your various lateral offices, quaestor, aedile, praetor, consul, which is at the top, and then after that, he spends the rest of his time as the sort of senior statesman in the Senate. So, in a sense, I don't really see him so much as being a king or anything like that, but I do think that he is a guy who meditated a great deal on the good and on what statesmen should do, and tried to put that into practice. So if that's what you would mean by a philosopher king, then I'd say sure, Cicero would be an example of that. So in terms of the book, what we do is it's written partially as a biography, a political biography of Cicero, but also just as a sort of meditation on politics in general, especially politics of our time compared to Cicero's time. And one of the reasons why we found that interesting is because there's a lot of cynicism and just, I guess, depression, you know, these days with the state of politics and the world today and whatnot, which I suppose is nothing new. In fact, it really isn't anything new because Cicero was operating at a time that was equally crappy, I think. In fact, probably even crappier than the time we're dealing with right now. And so a lot of the things that we complain about right now are things that Cicero faced during his own lifetime, and a republic essentially breaking down and tyranny becoming the norm. And yet, despite all of that, Cicero found some room for nobility, if you will, in politics. That it was still possible, it was still worthwhile fighting politically for the good. And I figured, God, if Cicero is able to say that in his, you know, sordid times, then surely we could take some hope in reading about him and applying him to us today.
Yeah, I usually say that every generation thinks that the times that they're living are unprecedented, and I can agree with let's say the generation of the First World War, maybe even with the generation of the Second World War. They had a lot of new stuff just from technology, from the nuclear threat afterwards, etc. But like, yes, we have the internet and etc. But like, so did Cicero, the end of the Republic, let's say. So every generation, I would say, it's on one hand unprecedented, but at the same time, we have seen it all over again. The struggle is like a human struggle afterwards. I would say, would you agree that like it does not matter the time?
Well, yes and no, I guess. I mean, on the one hand, there are certain things that are, let's say, unprecedented about our age. I mean, the sheer speed at which we are able to communicate with one another. I mean, flying halfway across the world, for example. Or just, what we see on TV or on the internet and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's definitely different from Cicero's time period. We have greater access now to, let's say, exploring foreign cultures or foreign lands through the internet that we will never visit in our lifetimes than Cicero ever had in his time. So I think in some respects on the level of, let's say, technology, and also on the level of just economics, things are different today. I mean, we talk about growth and GDP and all that kind of stuff. We have a whole set of metrics for measuring national prosperity. This is the sort of thing that wouldn't even have occurred to a guy like Cicero. And on that level, especially since the Industrial Revolution, we've witnessed a huge amount of growth, and that brings about a lot of changes in society. So in that sense, what we're dealing with is sort of unprecedented the last, let's say a couple hundred years. And when it comes to digital technology and that sort of thing, it's even more recent. But in the broader scheme of things, when you look at, let's say, for example, the conflict between the masses of the people and the elites or something like that, that's an ancient sort of division, Every social organization ends up calcifying, or if maybe that's not the right word, it just ends up stabilizing into a certain sort of tension between elites and a broader sort of mass of people, because not everybody can rule, But no, one of the areas though where it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Cicero's time or our own time period, where I think that things have been relatively uniform is in the general dynamics of politics. Per se, namely the struggle for power, the petty human passions that get in the way of people working together, whether it be ambition or just jealousy or rage or pride and that sort of thing. And I think that the ancients, Cicero and everyone else, were a lot better tuned into that than we are today. I mean, today we'll come up with, let's say, some wonderful social scientific study of emotions or how society functions and all that kind of stuff, and we have our own jargon and whatnot. But I find that reading a lot of that literature, I do not feel any more enlightened after it than if I were to just read, for example, a play by Shakespeare, and because Shakespeare tends to know us better than we know ourselves. And the funny thing about that is that because I do some occasional teaching at a university nearby here, and so we've got students who come over from the States, and we were doing a course, my co-teacher and I were doing a course in political psychology, and I found that the students really got into, I assume that they were into the social scientific literature that they were reading, but they really got into the last lesson where we discussed Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. Because you've got all the political psychology is all right there, and it's about a great story, which is, the fall of the Roman Republic and Caesar and Brutus and all that, and Cicero has a big part to play in that, in Shakespeare's narrative as well. So to come back to your original question, because I'm going off on a tangent, in some respects, I do think the times that we're living in right now are unprecedented, but in other respects, particularly when it comes more to politics as such, I think that the general texture of it is very similar to what a guy like Cicero would have dealt with in his time.
Well, before we continue, I get like the mincemeat getting cooked. It gives a lot of water, so it needs some time. On the other hand, I will start preparing, let's say, the rice, which will be like a side dish, and we'll even start sort of getting the chocolate and the butter melted, and go for the dessert, because I would say the salad is like the easiest part, so we're gonna leave the easiest part to the end. To come back to the ancients and the modern, in early 19th century, after the French Revolution, if I recall, it was Benjamin Constant talking about the liberty of the moderns and the liberty of the ancients, and I think that's a really, really great text just to read. As you say, it's Shakespearean style, in a sense, it just by reading, it's 10 or 15 pages, something like that, it's really nice just to read, it's so quotable. At least those are my 5 cents. But my question here will be not to, let's say, tell us what Constant says, but like, what's the difference in the view of liberty between the ancients and the modern? And because this is, again, during the Enlightenment era, does that modern differ from, let's call it today, whatever today is, let's say the post 1991, maybe because of the fall of the evil empire, maybe post 45 after the Second World War. So you choose what you call today, but what would be the difference between the way the people viewed liberty back in the ancient times, Roman, Greek, back in Enlightenment era period, post-revolution, and today?
All right, there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah, thanks for that. Well, we'll begin with, you mentioned Benjamin Constant, and so I think that was a speech that he gave in 1819, comparing these two different forms of liberty. Basically, what it comes down to is that the ancients, their liberty was a sort of political liberty, so that you would have a say in the regime that you were, that you were a part of. So you had a role to play in legislation and that sort of thing, a role to play in determining whether, the state or the res publica, the republic, goes to war or not. So yeah, it's a form of political liberty basically. Whereas the modern liberty is what Benjamin Constant calls like individual liberty, and effectively it's the freedom to be left alone, the freedom to move about freely. The right to privacy. I don't know if he actually uses the term privacy in the text, but I imagine he would include that in his definition of modern liberty. The right to take, whatever sort of employment that you want, etc., etc. So now for Constant, what is significant about this whole thing is, why is it that the ancients prized what he terms political liberty, while we moderns prize what he has called individual liberty? And I mean, it would seem to me that the reason for that is it has something to do with what you believe the ends of man and human community are. So what I mean by that is, if you believe that man is nothing outside of the polis, outside of the city-state, or outside of the nation-state, I guess, that he only can realize himself within the context of politics and a political regime, then it would be very important for you to ensure that all men, or all free men, have some sort of say in politics, in driving the sort of ship of state, if you will. Now, for us, I don't know if we're so clear as to what exactly the ends of man and political community are. At least for libertarians who believe that it doesn't really matter, that we're not going to pronounce what the ends of man are. You're free to do whatever it is you want, as long as you're not harming anybody else. And perhaps the reason why we subscribe to that has something to do with natural rights and things like that. That there is, in fact, that man actually has an existence that precedes the political community that he's in. Now, whether these rights are God-given or just nature-given or whatever is another matter entirely. But the point, though, is that man has an existence prior to politics. Whereas I think that is an assumption to which the Greek thinkers would not have subscribed. Man is in fact nothing outside of the polis. They had a word for a private citizen, someone who wanted to be, to be private outside of politics, and they called it in Greek an idiotes, hence our word idiot. Yeah. So that gives you an idea of how they viewed it differently. But there are other things that Constant analyzes in his lecture as well. One of them is just the sheer size of our modern nation states compared to the ancient, Greek city-states, and even compared to Rome as a city. Because we cannot possibly gather everyone into one place, like, in a Greek assembly or something like that, to deliberate on political matters. And so what we have nowadays, we have a system of representation. It's not a direct democracy. We have our representatives do things for us, and when we're unhappy with them, then we theoretically go and knock on their door and give them hell for not adequately representing us as they should. This is very different from the Roman Republic because one gets a sense when one looks at Roman Republican history that you have a sort of elite there composed of senators and what have you, but they're very detached from the people. And they're detached from the people because it's not their job to actually represent the plebs or anything like that. You take stock of the plebs only insofar as you need to prevent them from having an uprising and disturbing the general order. The plebs do have some representation in the form of the tribunes, but the tribunes also, if the rich elite classes got their guys elected into the tribunate, then the tribunate was just as likely to support the interests of the elite as that of the plebs. And so representation isn't really a thing like it is in ancient Rome, like it is for us today. Another issue that Constant zeroes in on is, so size and representation is one thing. Another thing, one of the obvious ones is slavery. When you had, a whole class of slaves that could do the dirty work for you, you had the leisure to sit back in your villa or whatever and talk to your friends and to discuss philosophy and all that kind of stuff, or to discuss politics, I bring that up partly just because I was thinking, like, if you were to have, even if we could have a direct democracy today, which is not inconceivable. I mean, surely you could probably have, they probably already do this, some apps in a country or something like that, where you can literally, you get a notification, and then you could just vote on that particular political issue. Do we want to have a traffic light installed outside here or something like that? Or do we need a new bike lane, in this particular neighborhood or whatever? And you could probably vote on that kind of stuff. But you think about the sheer number of things that we would have to deliberate on if we were to, spend all of our time deliberating on just politics. It would be overwhelming. Even if we could have a direct democracy through an app, I don't know if we would want it, because we have better things to do with our lives than to obsess over politics 24/7. We want to chill at home and play guitar and listen to, what do you listen to? Was that Beast in Black?
Yeah.
I've never even heard of that.
Heavy metal from
You
Finland.
were wearing it, so I threw on my King Crimson t-shirt. You just want to jam out Robert Fripp or something like that at home. And I figured, so I figured that a lot of people, even if they had the ability to participate constantly in democracy and in the polity, they would choose not to do it. They would want someone else to just represent them anyways, because we got other things. So yes, the size and representation is one thing. Slavery and leisure is another difference between the ancient world and ours for Constant. And one of the other things is commerce. For Constant, given the choice, people would rather conduct commerce with one another and be economic than go to war with each other. And so one of the reasons why we don't spend so much time, obsessing over politics and that sort of thing is because we want to just get on with our business, and make some money and that sort of thing. So that's another area where Constant sees a difference between the ancients and the moderns.
This is a question comes to mind from this. Technically, two questions. One is, look at today the post-scarcity world, where pretty much at least the developed nations are relatively rich they're rich in absolute standards. They're rich. Let's get one thing straight. The advanced countries are rich. The point is, coming to a post-scarcity world with more automation, we sort of have automation as our slaves, or sort of we get our problems solved. So should we maybe move to a more, let's say, a direct democracy style of world, that because we will have our basic needs at least met, and at the same time the free time to do whatever we want. So now we can even just joke around with whether I want the street light or not, and do that.
We could move towards something like that and basically make robots our slaves. I guess if that's sort of what you're driving at. I mean, people will probably raise the not irrelevant question as to what exactly separates robots or artificial intelligence from human beings. I mean, they're getting pretty good. Like they look a lot like us, move like us, and I mean it's technology's moved really fast in this general direction. I mean, no one would have thought that 20 years ago or something like that. And so there's no reason to assume that that speed of change is going to let up at any point soon. And you may well get to the point where you are faced with some sort of artificially intelligent being next to you who looks just like a normal human being, who is able to react just like a normal human being, who's able to have emotions, or at least to simulate those emotions just like a normal human being, and who is able to calculate at an exponentially greater rate than you or I can. And then actually the question there becomes, why should they be slaves to us? I mean, it's so I don't know. I think those sorts of things those sorts of questions will present themselves. And I mean, they're already presenting themselves on the fringe when it comes to other matters such as I think this is already starting back in the 60s and 70s, maybe even earlier, whether animals should have the same rights that human beings have. And the argument made in defense of that is, if we stop looking at your ticket to having rights as being, human beings all share in reason and whatnot, and instead look at, why don't we confer rights on all organisms that have the ability to suffer or to feel pain, then all of a sudden you have to include other animals than humans in that categorization as well. So a lot of this is going to depend on how we view what constitutes man and the nature of man. Now, for Cicero, what constituted, to bring it back to Cicero, if you want, I don't know, what constituted the nature of man is that we all share in reason. We are all capable of speech, and that is what separates us effectively from the rest of the animal kingdom. And that was part of the natural law. It's through our speech and our reason that we're able to know the natural law, that which precedes all human beings in all political communities. And it's not a very far step to move from that to speaking about the natural rights that we should all enjoy on the basis of our ability to reason. And I think this is where you get the connection between Cicero on the one hand and let's say the American founding fathers on the other hand, and this idea that it's self-evident that we have certain rights, namely the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, or life, liberty, and property, or whatever. So.
That's what I was gonna ask you regarding the founding fathers. To this day, academics discuss who had the most influence on the founding fathers. Was it Locke? Some even go to Cicero. Were other people really important? So, what would you say that that Cicero had? What effect or influence, let's call it, had on the founding fathers?
Yeah, quite a substantial influence. I mean, they were all very well read in Cicero. John Adams even was, I think, considered to be the sort of American Cicero. And when you mentioned Locke as well, it's worth noting that Locke, I mean, everyone in Locke's time was also interested in Cicero, but Locke, even by the standards of his age, had an unusually strong interest in Cicero. And so when you say that Locke, one of the ways of looking at the American founding is to see it as being very heavily influenced by Locke. Well, really, insofar as Locke was very heavily influenced by Cicero, Cicero has an indirect influence there. But his influence, I think, was also probably more direct, insofar as, let's see what they would have found in him. I think they would have found many of his ideas congenial, particularly when it comes to what a political regime should look like. So in Cicero, he was keen on, obviously, the republic, but what exactly does that mean? It is not a direct democracy. You've got a certain role to be played by the monarchical element, the aristocratic element, and the democratic element. And what you need is balance between all of those sorts of things. And I think you see that mirrored in the United States and its constitution. It's not about direct democracy. In fact, if you take, for example, in some of the Federalist letters, they complain about the direct democracy of ancient Athens. Because for them, what does that lead to? It essentially leads to chaos. Whereas for stability, you look to ancient Rome, the Roman Republic instead. And I think that Cicero is the most well-known or I guess profound of the theorists, if you will, of the workings of a republic, of a republican system. So I think they took that idea from him. I think I just mentioned the natural law idea and how that sort of elides in the natural rights. I think that was something that was a big deal for the founding fathers as well. I think, though, also Cicero as a man, as an individual, as a thinker, an immensely learned individual who was in politics, was something that appealed to them greatly as well. Cicero, the philosopher, statesman. And here I think it's worth contrasting Cicero to, or at least the founding fathers' impression of Cicero with Plato, for example. There are letters between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams where, Jefferson, for example, will dig into Plato, and I mean he writes beautifully and everything like that, but like just this guy was a utopian crazy guy and whatnot. Like how could Cicero, a man as practical as Cicero, have been so deceived by Plato as to actually appreciate Plato? And Adams in one of his letters talks about how I finally decided to sit down and actually read through Plato's longer political works like the Republic and the Laws, and he's like, I don't know what he's talking about. It's ridiculous, and it's just interesting because Cicero he considered Plato to be the greatest philosopher ever. I mean, he is in that same Platonic tradition, and the founding fathers respect Cicero highly, but not Plato. And I think that a lot of that has something to do with the fact that Cicero is he's actually involved in politics in a way that Plato never really was. So here's a guy who was pragmatic and practical and whatnot. So
before we continue, I just put some tomatoes inside. I will put this is a pre-made beef stock, and after putting all of this inside, I earlier put some tomato pasta, not too much because it's gonna get sour, and at the same time we want the tomato pasta cooked a bit because again very sour. So this will all simmer for 40 minutes more or less, and I'm just gonna leave it simmer, and afterwards we just add the beans, and more or less we are done with the cooking part of the main dish. And in the meantime I will continue with the dessert and the salad. But regarding you mentioned a lot of philosophers, and at the same time how it's hard to read them, etc., and understand them. So today the Pandit philosophers, we can call them like that, Pandit economists, because me being an economist, I can always talk about the economics. For example, look at Paul Krugman, and the Paul Krugman before winning the Nobel Prize, and the Paul Krugman, the Pandit afterwards. You will see him say the opposite things like 5 years afterwards, but at the same time he's one of the most read people nowadays, maybe what was Friedman in the 70s. So in philosophy and self-development we can go with Jordan Peterson, etc. So would you say that we need more of those kind of people, or do we need more of Plato or Cicero or Adam Smith or even Hayek, or you name it? Do we need more strict philosophy, or do we need something that can be readable by the people?
Well,
and understood by the people, by the layperson.
You need to have both, I would say. I mean, because you do need to have people who do the actual really deep thinking. Philosophically, I don't know much about Krugman or Peterson for that matter, so I shouldn't actually venture an opinion on them. But from what very, very little I do know, it would seem to me that philosophically they are nowhere near as interesting as Hayek, for example, or Adam Smith, or Plato, or I know Jordan Peterson really likes Dostoevsky. So you do need to have those much deeper thinkers on the one hand, but you do also need to have people who are able to communicate these ideas in simple language to the public. Insofar as your goal is to actually move public opinion, whether that is a desirable goal in and of itself, or whether it'd be better just to like hole yourself up in a monastery or something like that and, pursue your great thoughts, outside of the nefarious influences of the world, that's another question. But if you do want to move public opinion, you do need people who can actually communicate with normal individuals who are not so intellectual, with better things to do. So do we need more pundit philosophers, or do we need more, proper, profound philosophers? My inclination say it would be nice to have more profound philosophers, but it's quite possible that we already have many of them, and it's just because they are not as engaged in the punditry, they don't, their voices don't resonate quite as much in the public sphere.
See, I'm in a sense asking this. Of course, I have my opinion, but in a sense, I'm asking this because I still am a big fan of Doctor Who, and I remember in the second episode, Doctor Who is a sci-fi show that he can travel through time and space. The idea is he meets, 5 billion years afterwards of what the episode was made, he meets a tree, basically a living, moving tree from a different planet, etc. And all of a sudden you start and think about, even if they don't fill your brain with how you should think, let's say at the moment they stop, all of a sudden you think, how can this happen? What if it really happens? Coming to the previous idea of the robots, do they have rights? When do they have rights? And the idea is, I don't know whether the pundits should really tell us how to think, but at least they should sort of move us in the right direction. At least that's my take on this question. At least sort of make us more intellectually curious about these ideas, because less and less we spend time, reading and stuff, because it's social media world today, 140 characters and all of a sudden you know everything. Would you agree with this?
Well, you mentioned earlier about that they should try to move us in a particular direction. I think that many of them already do that. I think that the really good pundits, or maybe pundit is not the right word for them, but the really good, public intellectuals are the sorts of people who get us to genuinely think a bit more critically about our own values, as well as about what it is that what we should be doing or shouldn't be doing as a society. So, to a certain extent, I think that the bad pundits are the people who are the ones who actually close off that. They shut down that sort of thought process. They already give you, ready-made, a very simple formula for what you should think and who the enemy is. I think that I would like to see less of that, but I think that that's sort of, to an extent, inevitable in democratic society, where part of the goal is really to move the masses. You're not going to move the masses by having some, really in-depth, deep conversation about first principles or philosophy or things like that, where you end up, like in many of Plato's early dialogues, you end up in aporia, with just general confusion or uncertainty and no actual answer. People want to have answers. They don't want to just, be taken on a wild goose chase. I think that, and especially in a democratic society, so I think that it'd be very difficult to actually, on a mass scale, arrive at a more, shall we say, a more critical, genuinely critical society. I sort of hesitate to use that word just because I hate the way that word is often used, like critical theory and critical thinking and all that kind of stuff, which tends to be just a foil for progressivist sorts of the progressivist agenda. But I think that it's very difficult to get a mass sort of critical society, and even if it were possible, it may not be desirable, because you'd have basically a whole bunch of people just talking and debating and having very, let's say, high level debates. But then what are you doing? Like what is it? High level debates about policy and things like that. At the end of at some point, the talking ends up giving way to the actual action, even whether the action is, even if the action is not based on 100% facts or something like that. At some point, some people want to get things done, and not just sit and contemplate all day. So I think actually it's up to us as individuals to sit down from time to time, take some time out of our busy schedules, and do that contemplative work on our own. It's like when people talk about the polarization in media and everything like that, and what kind of a problem it is. First of all, I don't think that that's anything really new. I think that, a lot of people who say that think back to these sort of like halcyon days of whatever, the 1950s kind of like consensus, where you only had a few different news stations and whatnot.
And you had one enemy.
Communism. Sure, yeah, exactly. One enemy and that sort of thing. But some of the journalism in the 19th century was quite harsh and full of fake news and things like that. So I don't think that polarization is really a new phenomenon as such. And what's the solution to it? Well, the solution to it is that we as individuals just have to look for opposing perspectives. We can't just buy into everything that we find. And there are more opposing perspectives. There are more opportunities, to expose yourself to different opinions in media than there have ever been in the history of the world. We should be grateful for that. We should be using that opportunity.
I would add here, for example, Joe Rogan, right? He's not media, but at the same time he's far more listened to than any media, left, right, I don't know, Martian or whatever.
So who's this?
Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan. Okay.
Yeah, so Joe Rogan is like technically the media today, in a sense, especially for young people. Like him or not, does not matter. And this is, on one hand, as you say, we have so much information, but it's on the one hand hard to use it, but at the same time, do we really want to use it? I don't know.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. It is one of the oddities of our time, is that, if you were to take, go back to the ancients and that sort of thing, they probably suffered from a lack of information about, what was going on in the world, insofar as they actually cared about the world, whereas, and so they would have to make their decisions, their judgment calls in a certain sort of, in a vacuum, or not necessarily, not in a vacuum, but rather in a sort of a fog of uncertainty. They'd have to calculate probabilities and whatnot. For us today, we are inundated with information. And it's all at our fingertips. We can find whatever it is that we want. We can find whatever perspective we need to find to justify our prejudices and that sort of thing. And yet, despite all of that, we still operate in the same sort of fog of uncertainty, because we don't know which sources. We have an idea. We have a certain inkling as to which sources are more reliable than other sources.
But nor do we care, I would say, at this point.
Yeah, and part of that may just be because our politics, democratic politics, is so passionate. on the one hand. Part of it may just be for the very reason that we're inundated with so many different things that we say, oh, the hell with it. I don't want to, pay attention. I can't pay attention to absolutely everything. I'll just go with the guys that I know, that I'm familiar with, and if they say this is the way it is, then I'll just trust them that this is the way it is. So what's interesting is that in both the ancient world and in the modern world, for different reasons, we deal with a certain fog of uncertainty. And as a result, we deal with the inevitable necessity of having to use our prudence, our judgment. And so we come back actually to that ancient virtue, prudence, effectively. And once more, I think this is where Cicero is a wonderful guide for us today.
But prudence was really important to the Enlightenment era thinkers as well, if I'm not mistaken. They really. I remember reading in Smith. He really used the word a lot of times. Again, I had to sort of at that point use Google to get the proper meaning of the word. But like, I would before going to again more of the, let's say, of the talking part, of the cooking and talking part, let's go a bit to the culture part. So I know that you like red wine, but what about white wine? Do you like thank you. Do you like other alcohol, or is it like really strictly, red wine and nothing else?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm not too, I don't like to discriminate when it comes to my alcohol, but, no, I mean, I love red wine just because, I don't know, for me, there's a proper soul in the wine. Like, you can, you can taste it, you can have like memories that you never had or something like that. I don't have that same sort of profound feeling with a lot of the white wines that I've tried. It may just be that I haven't tried enough white wine, and that's an error that I'm very happy to rectify in my life.
If you didn't know, even though Scott officially might not be a philosopher, he's a philosopher. The wine has soul.
Absolutely.
If you didn't know, you heard it first here.
But no, I mean, I like other things as well. I mean, I actually, weird thing is, I didn't really properly like beer until moving here to Austria. So in Canada, there wasn't really like a craft beer culture, when I left Canada. That was in 2008. Or at least there wasn't, as far as I was aware. So, we were drinking, whatever it was, like Coors Light, and I was going to throw in Molson Canadian, but I don't want to sound unpatriotic. Like, no, Molson Canadian's a great beer. Everyone drink Molson. If we can find it here in Vienna, then I'm sure we probably can find it here. But anyhow,
Vienna is a big city, has a lot of beer, but come on, will you really find the Canadian beer here? Come on, let's be honest.
I have no idea. I think so. I'm sure you probably can at a beer store or something. Anyhow, I wasn't a huge fan of that back in Canada, but in Canada I used to love drinking like wine, but also cocktails, especially dry gin martinis. So I had my whole like martini mixer set and everything like that, and I think back in those days, like it was cheaper. I mean, if depending on your goals and drinking these drinks, it was cheaper to get, like a 2.6 of, Beefeater or whatever, and knock yourself out with that than to go grab some beers. And I just enjoyed no, I mean, it's not like it was cheaper relative to how much you would need to consume in order to achieve the desired effect, and for me, just the taste was better. Like I preferred gin to beer back then. But moving over here, I think my first experience with like proper European beer was when in 2007, and I was doing like a summer school thing in international studies and learning German, and that was in Strobel am Wolfgangsee, which has like 2,000 people in it. Like it's close to Salzburg, and there they had like one bar and they had one thing on tap, which was Stiegl. Yeah. And so I had Stiegl, and I thought, wow, what an amazing beer. Like for me, this beer is, there are other beers I like more now, but like, I mean, Stiegl is still, that is the one for me. That's the one that got me really into beer. I've come to cultivate a greater appreciation for beer at this point, thanks to Austria, thanks to Stiegl.
since you earlier
Do you need to put that as like a promo thing? Like, does that count as a promo? It wasn't intended to be a promo, but I know that
not necessarily. But if you want to fund us,
if Stiegel would like to fund us,
if Stiegel wants to fund this cooking show, I'm more than free to do so. Since you mentioned earlier the Beast in Black, there is one band again from Finland, and they have in a song something like German Lager über alles, and I think that. Coming again from Macedonia, I would say that we really appreciate, besides Rakia beer, and we really appreciate German and Czech beer for some reason. I don't know, maybe it's really good. I don't know.
I wouldn't know.
I was gonna ask you to sort of wrap things up with the modern, with the politics part and all.
Right.
What would you say are the biggest threats to liberty today?
Right. I mean, I suppose it'd be kind of cliche. I mean, I could give the typical sorts of the obvious answers that a lot of people mention in terms of external threats. Things like Russia and China. We could also, there's also economic factors that I think undermine liberty. I mean, I know that inflation has been in the news a lot recently, as well as debt. It's worth noting that Cicero, he doesn't talk about inflation, but he does talk about debt. And I think both of those things are quite dangerous precisely because, especially in our time, precisely because they seem like they're not dangerous. Like we've got high levels, we've been able to deal with, high levels of inflation, high levels of debt, and it seems like we're going to continue to be able to deal with them. And so we actually deceive ourselves into thinking that they're not problems. I'm drawing here on some of Hayek's thinking in Constitution of Liberty, where he talks about the dangers of inflation. He says that inflation is actually much more dangerous than deflation, precisely because when deflation hits, you'll feel it. You'll know it right then and there. It will hurt. Whereas inflation is like a drug. It's something that you shoot up with a little bit of it and whatnot. You kind of get used to it, and then the next time you need an even larger dose, and that just keeps going until the person dies, the countries die or whatever, or it no longer has an effect. I think those things are pernicious because they undermine our currency. And our currencies only have value insofar as we trust that they will actually get us something, and we've seen what happened here on the continent in the Great Depression with the hyperinflation. But debt is also pernicious for the very same reason, because it undermines trust. It's a sign that the people are unwilling or unable to pay back what they owe, and in a sense, it's actually an attack on property rights. In fact, inflation is an attack on property rights, because if I have a certain amount of money, and then tomorrow it's worth half of what it was today, effectively half of it's been stolen from me, And I think this is actually Cicero's way of looking at. Not so much inflation, but like debt in particular. It undermines precisely what you need for a political community or for society to function, which is to say trust, faith, fides in the Latin. So I think that's another thing that is potentially dangerous for liberty. I think also finally, one of the other really dangerous things is just a lack of confidence in ourselves and in Western civilization, and in the values that have brought us to where we are today. There's a great deal of cynicism, as we mentioned earlier. There's a great deal of cynicism and depression about just not only our politics, but the very values and philosophy that underlies our civilization. And I think that's actually really dangerous as well. So we've got external threats, but we've also got threats that come from within ourselves as communities, and even from within ourselves as individuals. And connected to that, within ourselves as individuals, an unwillingness, a reticence to speak about the virtues and the responsibility that is required in order to uphold a free society. It's not just freedom with no responsibility, or freedom without any sort of virtue, because that's not liberty, that's license, right?
Yep.
You need to have certain virtues to uphold that, and one of them is for example, moderation. Cicero talks about, the four cardinal virtues. What we know is the four cardinal virtues in his text De Officiis on duties. And wisdom is one of them, but he spends a lot of time talking about justice, which a part of that is liberality, so generosity. Greatness of spirit, courage is a part of that. And then finally, decorum, so seemliness, moderation, temperance, and you need to have all of those. It would do us some good to take that, I think, more seriously than we do. It's not just about freedom. Or it's not just about license.
Yeah. Well, with this we are ending the first part of the episode while we wait for the chili to sort of finish simmering and cooking, and in the second part we're gonna talk about more about what Scott does, and yeah. Well, welcome to the second part of the third episode of Cook and Liberty. I don't know whether you can see, but while the chili was cooking, we continued with the drinking part.
A few glasses in.
Yeah. So it should be even smoother transition, I would say. At least I hope so. Scott, so I know that you do a series called What Would Hayek Say, when you take sometimes contemporary, sometimes not contemporary, but ideas on what Hayek would say, and instead of reading like 500 pages, you sum it up in 15 minutes or so. But before going into what Hayek would say about, you explaining us what that is, can you tell me, what would Hayek say about food?
Eat it. It's good for you. Just enjoy good food, basically, I think. I'm trying to think, just in terms of like biographies and things like that, if there's any indication as to what Hayek actually did say about food specifically. I think he, at the end of the day, would applaud what you're doing here, Simon. I mean, there's a lot of spontaneous order going on here, with the emphasis more on the adjective than on the noun, I think. And so I think he'd give you a couple thumbs up to this.
If there's heaven, I hope Hayek is with us on this one. But what can you tell us about the what would Hayek say? What is that really?
Well, actually, as its name would indicate, it's basically a YouTube series devoted to looking at present-day issues. Sometimes issues of immediate relevance, sometimes issues of sort of more perennial relevance, such as the nature of democracy or things like that. And then just looking through Hayek's works and asking, well, what would he say about this today? So we've covered a wide range of different topics, obviously economic things such as inflation, most recently universal basic income, but then also, of course, some more philosophical things such as democracy, or what Hayek would say about free speech and the university, for example, the true meaning of liberty. What we've got coming up in the next several weeks is going to be a little bit of a change in the format. What we figured would be kind of interesting is to take one of Hayek's great works, and in my opinion his greatest work, or at least my favorite work of his, is The Constitution of Liberty, which is a beautiful and massive book, and to go through chapter by chapter and explain the salient points in each of the chapters, and connect them to present day concerns. So that's going to be our next project with the What Would Hayek Say series.
Quick, what would he say about universal basic income?
Well, the universal basic income episode was an interesting one, partly because there are some people who make a Hayekian case in favor of a universal basic income. And so they look, and it's not just like early Hayek, where some people will say early Hayek, well, he's a little bit more permissive of the state or that sort of thing versus a late Hayek who's somehow more conservative. No, it's you can find quotes in both Road to Serfdom as well as Law, Legislation, and Liberty that you could interpret as support for a universal basic income. And so there are Hayekians, or there are people who use Hayek's thought to argue in favor of a universal basic income. As far as Hayek himself, would he have been in favor of it or not? Probably not. And there are also people who study Hayek's thought who have made that argument as well. But that's what makes it such an interesting, that episode's so interesting actually, is that on that issue, Hayek's philosophy could be interpreted as going either way. And so what I did in that episode is just laid out both of the sides of the issue, and then the viewer himself obviously can decide and above all consult Hayek's own works on the matter. So.
I think that people would rather watch the What Would Hayek Say than read the 500 pages. Again, coming back to the 140 characters that you need for Twitter. I don't know whether people become more lazy or not, but like I know that you think that people are becoming more lazy, and me using the knife when I say that, it's a funny thing.
Did I tell you that people were becoming lazier? I don't think I told you that.
Regarding reading and stuff.
Yeah, to an extent. I think we lose context, but I'm actually not so sure if it was better back in whatever the old days were or not. I mean, people get distracted, and most people don't care about reading highfalutin works of philosophy, regardless of the time period in question. So, but that being said, I do think that a really important thing is for people to actually read with a mind to the context of the material that they're reading, and to read deeply. It's better to read, I think, one great text really carefully than to read excerpts from like 20 different texts. So,
well, before continuing, I have to apologize for putting words in your mouth.
I may well have said that at some point.
Or I may have just got the wrong conclusion. Who knows? At the same time, we are so both polite. But what would you say besides what's new? What can the audience expect from you in the near future? Let's say on your academic or whatever.
Several things. Well, first of all, I mean, here at the Institute, at the Austrian Economics Center, we've got our Free Market Roadshow coming up. And so a lot of our work at the moment is dedicated towards promoting that and planning it as well. And for those people who are not familiar with it, it's an annual roadshow. It takes place, here we've actually got some stops in the United States that get started about mid-March. But otherwise, it's normally a Europe-based roadshow where I myself and the rest of the team will go and tour around, more than 30 different cities. We don't each individually do all, 30 or 35 cities, but, I'll take like 5, and then, you'll take 5, and someone else will take 5, for example. We talk to policymakers, business people, students, academics, media, about liberty, about free markets, and about some of the most pressing issues of today, whether it be, environmentalism, obviously. Last year, geopolitics, for obvious reasons, was a huge topic. Property rights, housing, cost of living, that'll be a major theme, I'm sure, this year. So that's coming up it starts up, I think, on the 12th of April is the first date, and it goes until about the 12th of May. And so it will be an excellent experience, as it always is. It's not just an event, it's actually a proper experience. I found this because I did the road show, I started here in 2020, and then COVID hit. And so the road show had to go all online for 2 years. And so the first time I actually had the experience was just last year. And I did Spain and Portugal. And it was what I imagine is probably like the bands that we're listening to here, being on tour. It's actually quite exhausting, but exhilarating at the same time. We get speakers from all over the world who join us. So that's one of the major things that we've got going on at the present moment. Apart from that, obviously there will be, from my side, more what would Hayek say, videos, articles. Just published one recently on our website on the elusive international order. It was actually an essay that I had submitted last year to the Mont Pelerin Society because they had the Hayek essay contest, and it dealt with international order. My essay, for those of you who read it, was rejected for probably obvious reasons, but it's kind of provocative. But yeah, that was one of the things that I spent a lot of time working on.
See, I'm not even asking.
Thank you. Yes, it's very polite of you. Apart from that, I'll be continuing with. I have my own reading group, the Vienna Symposium. We'll continue to read the great texts. We've got a session coming up mid-February where we're going to be getting together and discussing John Stuart Mill's text, Utilitarianism. And finally, I've begun work on, planning mainly, but begun work on a new book dealing with science, the problem of science, and not just the way that science is conducted, but also the relationship between science and politics, the role of public intellectuals, and ultimately science and knowledge and wisdom. So I can't really say much more about what direction it's going to go in because I really need to look into a lot of these themes, but it's something that's been interesting me as of late. So
is this gonna be one of the smaller books up to 150 pages, or you're gonna do like one of the massive?
I don't know. It really depends on how the work just evolves. It's really tough to say.
As you said earlier, focus on the adjective, on the spontaneous part.
Yeah, it really is. No, because the thing is, like, you can only do so much planning on a project like this beforehand. At some point you have to just get into the research, and you come up, or at least in my case, I come up with new ideas as I'm going through the process of actually writing it. Like the writing itself is part of the thinking process, and then you find that there are certain things that, wow, I thought it would turn out this way, or that I might move towards this particular conclusion, but then you realize actually that makes no sense, or I was wrong, and then you end up drawing a different conclusion. So
how hard is for an academic to say I was wrong? Because I think I don't know of academics saying that, at least nowadays. I don't know.
I would like to think that, an actual honest academic would be very willing to admit when he's wrong. I don't think it's as common for pundits to admit that they were wrong, perhaps partly because their careers depend on them, accurately predicting things. No, I think that a proper academic should be very prepared to admit when he's gotten it wrong.
I am seeing this, and this is me telling you how pissed I am regarding this, but if you read Paul Ehrlich in 1968, if I'm not mistaken, he predicted the world hunger, etc., etc., and anyone who's into the liberty circle sort of knows about him, and you can find him in 2021, 22 or something like that, maybe even 2019. Anyhow, he says, no, I was not wrong, only about the time scales, not about the idea. I'm like, come on, how much proof more do you need? But and yes, it's a cheap shot against Paul Ehrlich, but he deserves it.
Well, was he right? Was he right in saying that? Was it? That's the thing. Maybe it's total bullshit, him walking it back like that. But maybe he's right. Maybe he was actually right in the logic. I've never read it before, but maybe he was right in the logic, and it was just the time scale that he got wrong. I don't know.
I would say he was wrong on both the logic and the time scale, but yeah, I don't see pundits.
I wouldn't know. I don't know, and that's actually something that you don't hear a lot in the public sphere today. It's like people who admit that I don't know. I don't know. I have to go check on that. I'll get back to you when I figure it out. We expect people to already have all of the answers. I should just mention parenthetically that that's actually one of the things that really got me into Hayek initially. This was about 9 years ago or so. This is actually a part of our Vienna Symposium group. One of my friends who's done some presentations for us here at the Institute, he had suggested that we read Hayek. And the funny thing about him is he's sort of got like some pseudo-Marxist leanings and whatnot. But we read Hayek's Road to Serfdom. And in reading that, I wasn't too enthusiastic about it initially, but when I actually started reading him, I thought, oh my God, this guy this is one of the most elegant and intelligent cases that I've ever seen for the free market. And probably best about it, it was done so, I don't know the right word, maybe gently. You know, Hayek was the kind of guy who, he mentions this, or actually he's criticized by Schumpeter at one point for never assuming anything more than intellectual error on the part of people who disagreed with him. You know, he never assumed malice on the parts of on the part of his intellectual opponents, and I think that really speaks to the kind of character that he was. There's an epistemic modesty that I think pervades in his entire work, and that really it appealed to me then, and it still appeals to me now.
See, I don't know not nearly as much as you about Hayek, but regarding the texts concerned with Keynes, for example, you can see that intellectual humility on the one hand, and on the other hand, as you say, no malice from the opponent. So this, I would say, one of the things that are very special about Hayek. Before we continue, before not continue, but more of we go to the, let's say, last section of the show. Let me just show you what we are doing. So rice that was, let's say, cooked before, I'm just sort of stir frying it a bit. Nothing more than basic salt and pepper. This is how the end salad would look like. Again, very easy. You add all the veggies, and as you can see, I forgot to add the pepper, but I'm gonna add it now. For some reason I forgot it. The curse of multitasking. You just put, regular stuff, whatever you want. You can put basil if you have like fresh basil, fresh parsley would work perfectly here. Here we have. This is sort of how the chili con carne would look like, and here during the break I have put the lazy cake here in a non-stick baking paper, and basically you don't even cook it, you just roll it like this, and this is how it looks. You can form it in any shape. You can do like a circle. It's your prerogative.
And let me ask you a question. Actually, I know we're reversing things.
Let's go.
So why? Because I don't know anything about the series and whatnot. You asked me this just like a couple days ago to talk to you for this episode. Why cook and liberty? Like why did you mix these two things together?
See, the first thing is I love cooking. That's one thing for sure. I love eating at the same time, and the idea is to sort of bring the liberty ideas in a non-usual way to the people. So maybe this will be popular with people. Maybe it won't. I don't know at this point. But the idea is we have to start somewhere, because everybody watches podcasts at the same time. Everybody listens to audio podcasts. So why not try something new that maybe will catch at the same time? We're talking about culture. I did not get to the chance to ask you much about Canada, but maybe in another episode we will talk about Canada. So that's the idea. So on the one hand, we talk about the cooking, the eating, we get to the anecdotes. So maybe people will be interested. All of a sudden they learn. Maybe they will hate my Simon style chili con carne, and all of a sudden everybody will hate it. I don't know. Maybe they will hate my cooking skills. It's fun. So let's see, let's try. That's the idea.
All right, so
great. Let's see what happens. So yeah, this is the lazy cake. As you can see, and as I've said in my previous episode, obviously I'm not a professional cook, because it's not the same length and width of all sides. But that's the beauty of this show, I would say. Since you asked. As you saw, I forgot to add the peppers, which I will do afterwards, before plating and everything. And This is basically done more or less. Needs like few minutes of simmering and I think we're done. But before we're done, I want this is how I always end the interviews and the shows that I'm doing. I'm really interested. This is in a sense very personal to me, so I sort of want to find liberty in this unfree world more. So I'm asking my my expert guests, so how to find liberty in an unfree world?
I'd say above all, I mean, liberty is something that you have to find, you know, within yourself, right? There's, obviously we can talk about institutions that are conducive to liberty and that sort of thing, but in a sense I think you make your own liberty regardless of the circumstances, because you don't have perfect control over the institutions or the structures that you inhabit. You do have control over yourself, though, and that's why, you know, to bring it back to a point that I was mentioning earlier, why it's important to discuss virtue, because that is something that you have control over. So I would say, yeah, if you want to find freedom in an unfree world, start by looking first within yourself, and you make your own freedom. That may not sound very satisfying, but it's I think it may sound very difficult, but well, as Spinoza says at the end of his Ethics, all things excellent are as difficult as they are rare, and if that proves to be too difficult for you, then I would say that liberty is best found in good food, good wine, and good company. So, cheers, Simon.
Cheers, Scott, and thanks again for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
With this, I will only add the plating part, but with this, we are ending this third episode. And again, thanks for joining us. Today with me, I had Scott Nelson. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Thank you.